I believe that happiness and fulfillment comes from seeing incremental improvement in your life. We all have limiting beliefs. We're always just one decision away from changing. It was not uncommon for us to be doing $1.5 million a week. The problems keep changing, but none of these problems are actually big problems. They're just something I don't know yet.
Mark Bradley is a bit of a legend in the landscaping industry. If you haven't heard of him, it's probably because you've been living under a rock. Landscaping pun? In this episode, Kevin and I were lucky enough to gain access to Mark's experience from the years of hard lessons learned in the dirt and leading teams. Starting with the early years, when he started his first landscaping business, The Beach Gardener, which he grew to over $50 million. And then he left to go start LMN, the landscaping business management software that much of the industry uses today. Mark is just full of hard-won wisdom from his years of perseverance and effort. I think there's going to be a lot of great insights for most businesses in this episode, and I think you're going to want to go back again and again. At the end of the episode, Mark leaves us with his 3 big keys to success for entrepreneurs. I think you're going to be blown away. We certainly took a lot away from this time with Mark, and I think you will too. So without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Mark Bradley. What I want to do is I want to pull back the curtain on Mark Bradley, the LMN story, and go way back here. So, Mark, when you first started in landscaping, what was the industry even like at that point before you really got into it? What was it like?
I started my landscape company, The Beach Gardener, in 1997. Yeah, it was very different. Most of my competitors didn't have websites.
But you did?
I did, yeah. I put a website out in month 1 kind of thing, very early on. And yeah, back then it was just a completely different playing field. I still remember when a friend of mine shared that there was a BlackBerry, right? That we were going to be able to do business with email. And
Totally.
My clientele, of course, to do business with email because they were business people that were doing business to business work all day long on email. And so the fact that I had a black and white BlackBerry on my hip used to be a big selling feature. They could communicate with me over email.
Totally.
Yeah, things have changed a lot. The internet was just really becoming mainstream around that time when you really think about it.
Right.
And you were project managing golf course builds at this point, 1997?
Yep.
What was the industry like from a commercial standpoint, and also from, I think you started as a side hustle, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was going on? There's not a lot of websites out there in terms of landscaping, residential landscaping. What was it like? I want to hear it from a residential side, but also from a commercial side. What was the industry like when we're talking about?
Back then, I think the industry was just starting to come into its own in the sense that people were starting to really charge appropriate pricing. I think for many years, landscaping was a lot of unprofessional companies without a lot of equipment, without really great products to work with either, doing the work more or less unprofessionally. And I would say I saw that as a big opportunity around that time. There was some great companies around, so I don't want to downplay that. There were some great companies, but there weren't many. And the great companies always seemed to be very busy. And I don't think that there was enough contractors then, and I don't think there's enough contractors now that are really good at doing the work. And so I felt if I took my trade skills, I had an apprenticeship in the nuclear industry where precision mattered and efficiency mattered and being good at estimating and being good at making money mattered. And so I felt like if I took those skills and applied them to the residential landscaping industry, it would be easy to be better than others. And so I think there was a great opportunity. And I still think that's the case today. I think there's a lot of landscapers, but there's not many who have really just focused on being really amazing at landscaping and really amazing at servicing customers. And I think if there's still every bit as much opportunity as there was back then. The industry's come a long way.
For sure.
There's all kinds of tools and technology and better materials and a lot more education around pricing and execution and design. And I think the industry's come a really long way thanks to a lot of those people that were first to the party. Back in the 70s and 80s, some of these incredible people developed associations, and those associations really focused on developing relationships with government and creating apprenticeships, particularly in Ontario, where we're from. And the industry's come a long way as a result. So I'm always super thankful for the early adopters, of those that got into an industry that largely wasn't really a recognized industry back then.
What was it like for you, Kev? You're building these golf courses. Was it more of a construction focus?
Yeah, we did a lot of earth moving, a lot of earth shaping, drainage, irrigation, seeding, sodding, the full gamut. It wasn't unusual to have 70 to 100 people on site, depending on the project. And I can remember my first few years going to a payphone at the end of the day, every day, to call the office to say, hey, I need 6 loads of this and this crew.
And a quarter.
Yeah, and quarters, because it's long distance, right? So you need a lot of quarters. And there was no Interact or debit to swipe. And yeah, we operated like that for quite a while. But the company I was working for at the time had some good systems in place. We were spending $80,000 to $100,000 a day pretty regularly on equipment and
Wow.
scrapers and rock trucks and all that kind of stuff. That was probably my first introduction into project management and efficiency and cost.
And that's $100,000 a day 30 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. It was, you get 300 or 400 tons of equipment running around all day and burning fuel and operators and all the labor following them. And yeah, it doesn't take long.
So it's 2 totally different paths. Like, you come in from the construction side, you've got all this experience working with these big crews, big machines, moving a lot of stuff around. What was it like for you when you first started, Mark? What was it? Was it a lawnmower, or was it a backhoe, or how'd you start?
Yeah, a pickup truck and a wheelbarrow, quite honestly. And like Kevin, my experience was more in large project construction.
Okay.
And so
Oh,
it was
you
a
mean
challenge coming from nuclear.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
It was a challenge to get used to working with skeleton staff and very little equipment.
Sure.
And working in nuclear, money is no object. Quality is everything. Safety is everything.
For sure.
Efficiency is not even talked about. Safety is everything. I think what became really challenging in the early days was just trying to figure out how I was ever going to be able to afford more equipment, more people, more resources to work more efficiently and more effectively. Like, it felt like very painful to take on a project and get it done. And I did $1 million in my first year, but it felt like I hit every bump on the road. It was just like unbelievably painful. I always look back at that year and I think about how sore I was every night going to bed and how tired I was every day of the week. But something compelled me to keep going. I was in love with the business.
How old were you, Mark?
I was 23.
Okay.
Yeah, it was so addictive, right? The idea of being stuck in that nuclear plant did not appeal to me at all. And it was a hard move to leave. I was on track to make a couple $100,000 the year that I left. And keep in mind that late 90s, that's
Yeah,
good
it's
money.
a lot of money.
The environment of the nuclear plant was very depressing. Yeah, at the end of the day, I felt like I went in the dark and I left in the dark. It was 12-hour days. I was working 6-7 days a week. It was just not a fun place to be.
Yeah.
And life wasn't really feeling the way I thought it was supposed to feel. And as soon as I started landscaping, all of that disappeared right away. As challenging as it was and exhausting as it was, it always felt like I was in the right place. At the end of the day, I just always knew that I was doing what I was meant to do.
Man, the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm like, it sounds great. You just said you were working 12-hour days and you're making bucket loads of money at a job that you're not really enjoying. And then you find time in your schedule to go take your truck and a wheelbarrow out and fill it up with dirt and move it around for some people in a side hustle. I'm like, how you must have wanted it so badly.
Yeah, funny enough, I actually started just doing a few Paver installs in the spring. I got really addicted to the Paver work. I loved laying pavers. So just I was good at it, and I really loved designing and loved the challenge of trying to
Yeah.
get these projects done over the weekend. And so that was really how it got started, just doing little tiny small jobs. And I very quickly realized that the demand was there. It felt like I was overwhelmed with work, and all I had was a little classified ad in the local newspaper down in the Beaches neighborhood in
It was
Toronto.
ads.
It was a little tiny word ad that was $7 a week, and I had to go into the newspaper place and put that ad in manually and
Amazing.
pay them the $28 for the month. But that ad kept me busy in that side hustle. And to be honest, that little ad is what got the business going for the first couple of years, just keeping a nice little simple word ad. I had call after call, and that was it.
That's so interesting. I think from my experience in working with Kevin, I think everything is just referrals based.
That's it.
But it's really interesting to hear that you were saying, hey, I do landscaping in this tiny little ad, and it was working for you. How did you come up with that being your way forward?
Back then, that's all there was.
Yeah, there was no other way.
There was
Really?
no internet really at the time. You certainly weren't going to advertise on the internet. So it was just the pinnacle was to have yellow page ads, but I wasn't going to be able to afford those for a few years in my mind. So it was the classified ads and job site signage. So my business exploded largely around job site signage and referrals. So at the time, I'd get the first few jobs with the word ad for sure, but the job site sandwich boards were where it was at.
I love it.
You'd throw those up on the job and leave them there as long as you possibly could after you'd
Until
leave,
they're calling you?
because people would call based on those, or they'd talk to the homeowner as they were out walking around the neighborhood. But I got really lucky. I did a project in a brand new neighborhood right in downtown Toronto. There was a racetrack on the property, and they tore the racetrack down and built a new neighborhood. And that was like a horse racing track. And I did about 70 projects in that neighborhood in my first 2 years in business. It was just one after the other. And so that was really it. Just really leading with good design and really good quality of work. But I was fortunate, I think, to have the skills because I had been working with my father in construction for 10 years, building houses and doing the work. And then I did my apprenticeship, and I could weld, and I was a good carpenter, and I was reasonably good at doing stonework, I would say. I wasn't as good as I was at the other building trades, but I felt like there was a big opportunity, and so I just focused on quality off the start.
And so you were coming into it and you were talking about kind of the competition when you were out there, what the business landscape was like. Pun? Landscape pun? No. But my question is, okay, so we've got that you are obviously a quality kind of nut and you're going super hard. You've got this passion for it. Was it the passion? Was it the innovation of business and being the one guy with a website? Was there something that made you stand out the most, you would say?
I would say we used to get the jobs done quickly, and we used to really focus a lot more on design than other companies. I was very fortunate getting into business. My sister was an interior designer, and she really loved to do landscape design. So she gave me a lot of advice, really catapulted the business forward early on by actually doing really high quality design work for me while I was out doing $25,000 to $50,000 jobs. So she could do architectural grade drawings, and then I could go sell with those drawings, and then I would end up with projects that were just way beyond my design skills at that point in time. Wow. And so I feel like I was almost doing an apprenticeship in design in my first 2 to 3 years in business under the direction of my sister, which was a pretty incredible gift to get really early in my career like that.
So Kev, you found design later, but how did you get to building the big projects that you did without in-house design team? Like now, how many designers do you have? 4?
Yeah, we have 5 at Vast now, but yeah, I don't know that the projects were as big before we had the designers. We were doing some projects for some landscape architects that were large projects. And I think that was one of the things that kind of helped me spur on the commitment to hiring somebody, was knowing that this is working for them. These are the types of projects that they're generating with it. If we could come up with the same sort of detail and design, then maybe we can, have more opportunity at more of those types of projects. One of the things I wanted to get into a bit today was to ask Mark more about when you were at that stage, left the engineering, and you were now full-time focused on the Beach Gardener. At that time, a year or two in, what was your thoughts or your mission at the time? Or did you have a clear vision of where you wanted to go then?
Yeah, no, I would say not. Like, I always joke around about this topic whenever it comes up. My father, when I was leaving the nuclear industry, he said, "You've got an incredible job. Why landscaping?" And my answer, I had done landscaping growing up through high school and kind of fell in love with it then. But my answer was simple, really. I just said to him, "I think I want to go skiing all winter." And, landscaping, I get to only work 7 months a year, and then I'll just go ski all winter. Now, if you asked him right now about my skiing, he'd probably say, "I'm not sure when he's going to start skiing all winter, but one of these years it might happen." I quickly realized that the landscape business wasn't a seasonal business at all, that's for sure. But my mission was pretty simple. I knew that I didn't want to work in nuclear, and I knew that I didn't want to work for somebody else. And so I think my mission when I set out was just to create my own future, just to be able to control my own destiny, work when I wanted to work as hard as I could, and really truly just benefit from everything for myself. So my mission was very simple. My first year in business, I saved enough money to pay for my wedding. I made enough money to buy a house. Mm-hmm. And so that was a pretty successful year. Had
Definitely.
I stayed with my job and paid tax on that big paycheck that I mentioned earlier, I don't think I would have been able to pay for a wedding and put $50,000 down on a new house.
Right.
As a self-employed, you had to put 25% down. First house was $200,000. At the end of the day, that was a pretty big win in year one. And so what was my mission was probably that simple. I needed enough money to get married, and I needed to buy a house to bring my wife home. At the end of the day, it was pretty simple. I think it evolves over time.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think at that time, looking back at it now, you had much business savvy? Do you think you were strategic planning or thinking about SOPs yet or anything like that?
No, not at all. I would say I had the benefit of really seeing what good estimating, good job costing, and what standard operating procedures would lead to working in nuclear, and especially the type of work that I ended up doing as I finished my apprenticeship and started to manage work and get into project management and estimating. I was really a little bit ahead, I would say, of my age. My nuclear apprenticeship led to really good things really quickly. I was very fortunate, I think, to be at that age where I knew how to use a computer.
Right.
And so a lot of the older guys that I was working with in nuclear, they had no interest in computers. So I was exposed to estimating and project management and material management, even safety work very early because I could use a computer. And so when I did set off into my own landscape business, I wouldn't say that I knew much about the business at all. I understood how to estimate, how to do the work, and how to job cost the work. And I centered my business philosophy around that, maybe a little too much early on. I wasn't good at sales. I wasn't good at really understanding people. And I definitely wasn't really thinking strategically about how to grow the business. I was just really thinking, I know how to do the work. I know how to price the work. I know how much it costs to perform the work. And I think I get the work done at a better quality and like maybe a little faster than others. When I started seeing how other people were performing the work, I knew that I was efficient. And so I would say that my business skills were probably really low, but my trade skills were probably above average for a 23-year-old
Great
kid.
base.
Yeah.
Great base.
Okay, so your whole mission is to, right from the get-go, buy back your time. Like, you're trying to build this life. Has that really changed that much since then?
No, I would say what I was always focused on was creating freedom. It was always to create freedom.
I like that,
Like
yeah.
all the way back then, it was just freedom. When I would go into that nuclear plant in the dark and leave in the dark, it felt like a jail sentence of sorts. And so I just wanted to create freedom. That was all. Jokingly, all the jokes aside about skiing and whatnot, what I really was looking for is just being able to get up and go do something that I loved each day. I knew that I wanted to build stuff. I love building stuff. I still do to this day. And I just wanted freedom. That was it.
One of the things we've talked a lot about when putting the Wealthy Landscaper together is like using your business to fuel your life. And I know you and I have talked about that in the past too, and how the two correlate. But I think it's something that is underviewed by a lot of entrepreneurs because they think by working like we all did at the beginning, these crazy hours, they're giving more to their family. You get this misconception of, oh, if I just work harder, I'm doing more for others or for the company. Yet if you're not fulfilling or taking the time to fulfill your own needs and your family's needs and the time that you need to spend, it becomes a cycle, and it's a difficult one to get out of. And I think for a lot of guys, they think by working harder, they can overcome it. But ultimately, you have to be able to step back and really evaluate your time and how your business fuels that time.
I totally agree with that. And I think what happened for me, I got into the business seeking freedom. And then I built myself an inch by inch kingdom that took all my freedom away. And I think that is a pretty common mistake. We get into business thinking it's going to create freedom. But really what happens is when you don't have the right people and when you don't have systems and processes and standard operating procedures, you end up creating a business that very much relies on you. And you can't leave the business for more than a few hours, or in some cases, a few feet, and something's going wrong. And so therefore you end up contained by the business, which means you've actually removed your freedom. And so early on in the business, I hit that wall pretty quick, doing $1 million worth of sales in the first year. If I wasn't there, nothing was happening.
Right.
And the business kind of ran that way for a number of years. And I think your mission starts to evolve, as you pointed out, as you've been in business longer. But there's also just life that starts to evolve. And for me, the first 5 years or so, it was okay having that inch by inch kingdom. It still felt like freedom because I was out there doing what I wanted to do. I was surrounded by people that I wanted to be around. And the nice thing when you're self-employed, particularly in those early years, if you don't like people that are working with you, you just get new people.
Right.
And so it felt pretty rewarding. I was surrounded by great people and positivity, and we worked hard and we had a lot of fun outside of work and whatnot. But by the time I hit 30 and I decided to have kids,
Yeah.
that had to change a little bit. And suddenly the systems and the operating procedures and the managers and training programs and metrics and all these things started to become more important to me. But really what happened was my mission changed.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted a business that was a business that could actually run itself in my absence.
And do you think that was the change? Like, what made you realize that was something you needed to refocus on?
For me, it was definitely starting a family.
Right.
The business had scaled quite a bit, and the project sizes were getting bigger and bigger. And the better work you do, the better projects you get. And we were doing good work. So we were getting some really big opportunities. And as the opportunities got bigger, my kingdom got smaller. Revenue was going up, but I was working harder and harder. And I'll never forget the moment I had my first baby, and I think most of us will never forget. But that really did change everything. At that point in time, the freedom thing really became more important. I started to want that time at home. And when you want that time at home, you have to figure out how to systemize the business. Around that time, other people that were working for me really started to evolve as well. They started having families. So the family dynamic started to come into play where we had other people to support. And so the mission gets a little different. And for me, I think my mission then evolved a bit, not nearly to where it is now, but it evolved to the point where I just realized the business had to be bigger than me. The business couldn't be about me. It had to be about us. And so there was a big shift in around that time frame.
So you were grinding from year one, hitting $1 million. You then went on for 6+ more years of nose to the grindstone.
No real documented systems, no really defined accounting methodology. Just we've got QuickBooks,
Hard work.
We've got a website, and we've got Blackberries.
Yeah.
And we'll take over the world.
Yeah, with the Blackberries. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty basic. Yeah, no, absolutely. And during those years, the business grew quite a bit. So I would have been, by that point in time, 5 million-ish with no systems. Just out there getting it done, doing $500,000 projects, just working hard.
Man.
Up at 6.
What size is your team, and who's making up your team? Like, if you're doing 5 million in mid 2000s, that's a lot of hardworking people, I'm guessing. Like,
yeah, on a given day, we were probably 25 people in around there.
Wow.
I would say. We'd had some subs here and there as well, but generally speaking, yeah, we were 20, 25 people in those years, and just really hardworking, really well-intentioned people that understood that we had to get lots of work done each day.
Yeah.
We were always good at explaining that, how long things should take. I was very focused on estimated versus actual hours right from the start, because that was my language from nuclear. So I always talked about how long things should take. So in the absence of systems, really good awareness can go a long way. And I found I was able to get to that size, and I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. It's just fortunate, I think, that I had that language to speak estimated versus actual hours and let people know what good looks like. We should be able to get this job done in 3 days. And if we don't, then there's something wrong. And so I managed the business like that, I would say, for my entire career. But I systemized it, I would say, after 7 years or so in business, after realizing that it was exhausting being the ruler of that inch-by-inch kingdom.
The one interesting thing about that, though, too, is the consistency. You obviously had that consistency all the way through, and I think it's something that a lot of guys overlook as an industry. Everybody wants that quick growth or the quick fix.
Yeah.
And without consistency, even without systems, consistency can go a long way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really, truly does. And I think that consistency is what leads to a good entrepreneur to understand that they have to create some standard operating procedures, and there has to be a way of doing things that goes beyond them. So being really consistent for many years did give us a lot of insight into what we needed to build. And it was 2004 when I hired Mike Lysecki, who became my co-founder at LMN. And between 2004 and 2007, he was the director of operations at TBG. And for those 3 years, what we did was we created the frameworks that would become LMN. So we systemized the business. It took us 3 years to systemize everything we were doing. And we built a operations hub that replaced the need for a lot of middle managers. And that operations hub allowed people who were in frontline positions to order material, make requests for equipment deliveries, uniforms. Like they basically, everybody had a Samsung tablet at the time with a cellular connection, and we built a whole series of forms that people could just push a button and do all of these different functions in their business. And that created the replacement for a lot of managers. And so we ran a really flat organization where field crew foreman was the title we were calling them at the time. We've since gotten away from calling people foremen, and we call people crew supervisors. But ultimately what we were doing at the time was we were letting them manage their job site from start to finish without a project manager. And so they became project managers. They were hands-on crew foremen that managed all their material, that managed all of the requests for information. They managed change orders. They knew how to estimate. They knew how to fix things. They knew how to report problems, all through this portal that we built on these tablets. And they just started to take on this very different responsibility, I would say.
For sure.
Because the more we gave them, the more they took on. And I think that's when my mission started to change. I started to realize that people armed with systems could really move a lot faster. And I didn't see that clearly. I think being an apprentice and coming into nuclear and getting into the business so early, maybe too early, I don't think I quite saw that clearly until we really built this. And when I built it, the business changed really quickly. From 2007, I think 2007, we may have been right around 7-8 million, to 2016, all companies total were 50 million.
Yeah,
so massive
unbelievable
growth in those 8 years.
And that was because of this database system that you built.
It was, yeah, but we had systemized the business completely, everything from the way that we would do budgeting as a company for divisions and for crews. And then I created a incentive plan that was tied to that. And then we built this operations hub that I was describing, which basically put the standard operating procedures in the hands of everybody where they needed it.
Totally.
And they could push a button to make things happen. And that took the company from where it was in 2007 to where it ultimately ended off in 18 when I
almost
sold
10
the
times
business.
revenue in those 8 years.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Just the system.
There's been very few stories like that in the landscape industry, but it is possible. And I think one of the things I've always heard you talk about is lean, trying to keep your business lean. And I think there's so many great ways to do that. And software has certainly in the past 15, 20 years has come so far to help us all run lean. And I think it's one of those things too that a lot of guys struggle. They look at the $800 a month or whatever the cost of it is for these different types of systems, but yet they underestimate what they actually do for them. It's like, I remember when we started with LMN, we were actually just doing a training thing for the Wealthy Landscaper the other day where we're building $1 million estimate in 15 minutes with takeoffs and perfect verbiage, perfect descriptions, very duplicatable, very systematic. Anybody, if I fill it in or the GM fills it in or one of our PMs, it's going to be the same number.
Yeah.
And how many hours does that save you, like, when you're doing that?
You have an outlay of hours at the beginning, building it and building the verbiage, just to make sure you're checking all the boxes. But often as landscapers, a lot of our work is relatively repetitive, whether you're a paver patio or a pool install or flagstone, whatever it might be. A lot of it comes down more so to your takeoffs. If you can peer review your takeoffs so you've got accurate takeoffs, then it's very easy to build an estimate on LMN.
Which is something that you said you put in place where you have basically two people go out and look at the same job and then talk about their results.
Yeah, they both use an estimating template and then they discuss why they're different if they are different. And then from there, one of them builds the estimate. It's so interesting how much that changed your business. As lean as you were to 10 times in 9 years or 8 years is incredible. What do you think were the dramatic changes for you in that 7 to 50 million? And I know there was a lot of things with being unionized and different types of work and 407 work and still doing ultra high end projects. But how did you evolve as an owner during that time where you knew what the next thing was, or was LMN something that helped you with that?
Yeah, I think LMN did help to some extent. Clearly, the product helped me with budgeting, estimating, time tracking, having the data to really understand the business in real time. So that was why we built it. We needed it to scale. I always try to describe this to people. When we built LMN, we built it to gather data so that we could make better business decisions as it related to productivity, efficiency, estimating the next job. We just needed to know reality. And so that's really what that does. And it's an important tool, but it's just a tool at the end of the day. It told us what we needed to know to go and focus on driving improvements that would actually change the business. So LMN provided the foresight when estimating to predict a job properly so it would be profitable. And then the job would get done and we'd look at the costs in QuickBooks and then we'd know how it went. And we just got better and better at estimating, as you just pointed out, to the point where we could do more complicated work than other people.
Right.
Because we were confident in pricing it. And so I think what ended up happening over time was I had this realization that with all of this data, we could then decide where to focus our efforts and do more work in less time. And so what I really started to focus on was this other metric that I had never considered before, which was revenue per hour. So I started saying to myself, hey, wait a minute. I've got this job where we put 1,000 hours in, and that project was 3 times the revenue of another job where I did 1,000 hours. And I only have so many hours available.
I want more of those ones.
Yeah, time is not exponential. We can only hire so many people that know how to do this work. So I want to sell more of those jobs that have higher revenue per hour. So what I ended up doing was I started looking for jobs that had really expensive materials, high-end residential, or other jobs where I could put in a lot of material exceptionally fast, like highway construction,
Right.
or building trails, or restoring shorelines that had eroded. Those big, massive open areas where we could just move mountains of material super fast. And so I looked at those two as my niche markets. Those are not really that niche-y.
Who says that?
But it was just, hey, I want high revenue per hour work. So that became my strategy.
That's your niche.
Right. If it doesn't have high revenue per hour, we don't do it.
Do you know what the number was? Just curious.
Yeah. When my last year, 2018, I think I was number 62 on the top 100 list for landscapers. We were number 1 for revenue per hour, though, which meant we could produce a lot more revenue per hour.
That's the number you want.
Yeah,
anybody.
I like that.
And that one was it for me. So yeah, it was $267 per hour. That year was our average revenue per hour.
That's interesting. Wow.
Now, keep in mind, we were union, and we were bidding against union companies who had to bid with higher than average rates. So I always try to make sure I point that out because my minimum wage was $56 an hour in the company. And that was a first year laborer. So we were paying exceptionally high wages. We were doing projects where customers could afford to pay those wages if they were residential,
right,
or if it was commercial work, it was union only bidders. But I was able to win a lot of work in the residential market, paying those union wages, bidding against non-union contractors. Because at that point, our overhead was only 3%. And the average
3%.
overhead, 3%. And the average...
That's so lean.
Yeah. So we could actually pay our staff $56 an hour and still compete because our overhead was so low. So I was actually able to work on residential projects quite regularly, despite the fact that we were unionized.
I think what a lot of the listeners will be able to relate to is the analogy of looking for the right work. I think no matter what, whether you're in maintenance, you're a paver specialist, you're a pool person, you cabana construction, whatever it might be, but focusing on those things that not only produce for you, but that you're really good at and that you can build efficiently and effectively makes all the difference. Because I think we were talking about this earlier, how everybody's looking for the glamour jobs, but often if you're not really set up for them, they can really bite you.
Yeah.
So I think even hearing that at that level, it relates down to somebody who's doing $1 million or $2 million, but is like super efficient at doing pavers.
Yeah, and pavers are a perfect example. That's how I started out, as I was saying earlier. And pavers, you could go do 1,000 square foot driveway in a day, or you can take 5 days.
Right.
And when I used to go lay paver driveways, it was going to be done in a day. And we were going to do it the most efficient way possible. And I was going to show up with an 8-ton excavator and dig that 1,000 square feet out in an hour. I wasn't going to make it an all-day event. And the base was going to be in before 10 o'clock break. That's just how we did it. And I didn't go and lay the $3 square foot paver. I was going to sell the $8 square foot paver, because at the end of that day, if I laid 1,000 square feet, that was $4,000 more in revenue that we produced that day by selling the expensive paver. So I was always selling the expensive pavers. And at the end of the day, it was just, how do I get more material in faster? And how do I sell the most expensive materials? And that became my focus. Now, no secret, when you've got a designer, you can put more detail into the drawings, more expensive products into the drawings, and you can get a lot more efficient at producing the work because you've got precision drawings that allow you to be precise with materials. What I did very quickly, I learned how to take my drawing and turn it into 5 drawings. Page 1 was step 1. Page 2 was step 2, 3, 4, 5. I engineered my drawings as instructions. Here's what we're going to do first. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. And there was a material list on each page. So if we were going to go there for 5 days, we value engineered the job and we created a 5-day plan on the drawings. And so engineering became a major component of my efficiency. We ended up hiring engineers eventually who could create value engineered project plans, which allowed us to go and execute really complex jobs in 30% less time while also having much lower overhead,
Right.
which allowed us to pay really high wages to attract the best talent and then make a much higher than average profit.
Perfect storm.
There's 2 things that stand out to me. The first thing is, how much stress did it put on you personally? When I hear 3% overhead as a business owner, my jaw drops because I can't imagine what that would be like, except for that it would put so much pressure on you. Were you carrying a lot of that weight at that point?
Yeah, I always think business owners are always going to carry a lot. That goes without saying. But I think when you really understand your finances, that weight doesn't really feel the same. And so early on in the business, I was pretty fortunate to hire a few different business consultants. And this was year 3, 4, early in business. Once I understood how to budget, everything got better. John Paul LaMarche, you probably remember John Paul LaMarche. He used to come over to my office every year and go through my budget with me. And by then I knew how to budget.
Right.
I just loved having him come in and go through it with me and almost reassure me that this wasn't crazy.
A second set of eyes.
Yeah, just a little extra confidence. And so I've always really focused on seeking out mentorship and learning from peers. But that helped a lot, having that extra set of eyes. Then I started to network more with my peers, and I would go out for lunch with George Urvari. For years, he and I would go out for lunch once a week. And he was the big guy in town
Right.
and that to this day, big successful business doing beautiful projects in Toronto. Definitely one of the best companies in the city. I was fortunate enough to go for lunch with him. And so once I was armed with my budget, and then I had these peers and consultants, I had this weight almost lifted off of me because I could ask good questions.
Yeah.
Hey, do you think this is possible? And if they'd say no, I didn't necessarily listen every time. I made many mistakes on my own not listening. But generally, we could have a conversation that had some meaning to it because I understood my finances. And so I think the budget was probably the foundation for almost relieving that stress that you would think would be overwhelming. I always had the numbers in my mind. I always knew that if I stayed within my budget, I was going to have a good year. And so I think I went to bed each night and fell asleep very quickly. And I never lost a moment's rest over finances in the business.
But what about the people that don't have that? What about the people that are moving the machinery and they just love the act of landscaping? What do you say to those people?
I always tell them the same thing. You're going to enjoy it a lot more when you understand the financial side of the business.
Okay.
And it is actually a lot more fun when you understand that side of it, because then it's a game. And so I think when you're playing any game and you don't keep score, you maybe play the game, but not with much intensity. And soon as you start to keep score, the intensity goes up and the game becomes more interesting. And I think understanding your budget and understanding how to estimate and track labor hours, it just puts you in the game, because now you can focus on it and truly understand how you're doing. Are you winning or not? And if you love moving equipment around and you love doing landscaping and you love the outcome of a project and making customers smile at the end of the day, that's all great. But you got to know whether or not you're winning. And when you do know, it's just more fun because you play it differently. It's just that simple.
I love that.
Do you think too, Mark, one of the things I've noticed and I've talked to a few other people about is like you just get better at it.
Yeah.
You get more used to the pressures, you get more used to the decision making. Like as your business grows and your cash flow is better, it's just easier to make good decisions. But over the years, things that would stress you out in the first couple of years, you don't even think about at year 10. Your concerns are different than when you started.
Getting started, I was worried about making money. By year 10, I was worried about cash flow.
Right.
Very different problem. Make lots of money, but you got to get it in fast enough to pay everybody on time. Completely new set of problems. And again, I had to go back to my financial skills. My budget wasn't actually helping me manage cash flow. And when the phone's ringing and people want to get paid, you saying, hey, I'll pay you next week only goes so far. Back to some financial upgrades. My entire career, I've never been able to stop learning for that reason, because as the business scales, new problems pop up. And I think that's why it's so valuable to have mentors, to have coaches, to be in peer groups. Is I really, truly believe that the problems keep changing. And so early on, I needed to know how to budget. Then I needed to know how to recover overhead because my overhead started to grow. Then all those problems are gone. Now I need to understand how to motivate crews. Wait a minute, now every crew needs a budget. Now they need to know as much about budgeting as I needed to know about budgeting. So that was a thing for a while. Once I overcame that, then cash flow became a problem because now I've got a lot of payroll
Big
to make.
moving machine, yeah.
Yeah, at one point, it was not uncommon for us to be doing $1.5 million a week. And when you've got that much money rolling through the business every day, $300,000 a day in revenue means $250 a day in expenses.
Right.
And you have to pay for those expenses. So cash flow became a big thing. And, then you start to learn about banking, debt to equity ratios. And there's rules there that you're not supposed to break. I broke them without even knowing the rules were there.
Right.
And when that is broken, it's broken. I think what happens is the problems keep changing and they keep getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, but none of these problems are actually big problems. They're all very solvable, and there's many people who know how to solve them. And when you seek mentorship, when you pay a little bit of money for coaching or pay a little bit of money for advice from an expert like a lawyer or a business advisor or an accountant, you avoid a lot of really painful mistakes. And so what I started to learn as the business started to really scale was I had to really never stop evolving. I had to find better and better mentors to solve bigger and bigger problems. But what I realized is the problems are never actually that big. It's just a different advisor that I needed. And the problems are all the same.
Interesting.
They're all the same. They're just something I don't know yet.
I think that evolution of business growth, or anybody that's had some success as an entrepreneur, you go into it with these expectations that you've created for the next 3 years or 5 years, and you hit that goal or surpass it early. But if you're continually learning and preparing for that next stage, they always come.
Yeah.
You can go into it thinking, oh, it'd be amazing if I hit 3 million. But then once you do, inevitably you continue and your goals change or your focus changes or your life changes and you need more fuel to live the way you want to live. But I think what you just said is so key, that continual learning and preparing for the next phase. And sometimes it's not even related to what you're doing at the time, but it's so good to prepare and deal with the right people and look to people too that have done it.
That's it. Looking to people who have been where you want to go, I think is pretty important. There's, this concept where you have to evolve as the business evolves. And I always talk about the ones and the threes. So at 300,000, you're a different business owner than you are at $1 million. Companies that take time to get up to the $1 million mark, oftentimes that can take 10 years. But once they get to the $1 million mark, somehow they just surge right through.
Right.
And they end up getting to 3 million. And at 3 million, you have to change the way that you operate because you can't be everywhere all the time. So you start to learn that you have to rely on other people. And to go from 3 million to 10 million, effectively, you learn that your job is to build people, like we talked about earlier.
Right.
And so now you're the builder of people. And if you build people, the company will just build. It'll attract more customers. It'll attract more opportunities, partnerships, whatever you're looking to attract. But to get past 10 million, you have to evolve again. Because what the people that you've attracted up to get you to 10 million are not the same people that will take you to 30 million. And so you have to learn how to attract a leadership team, which is very different than building project managers and building tradespeople. Building out a leadership team is an art in itself. And as you start to expand the business, you learn what's holding you back. And for me, at 10 million, I was feeling really stressed out with the business day to day for the first time ever. Despite having the financial awareness, cash flow was becoming this problem. And that was when I realized I needed an actual accountant. I didn't need a bookkeeper anymore. I needed somebody who could really forecast the business, look at what was going to happen with cash, and almost have this crystal ball. And I remember hiring that person and them coming to me with a cash flow forecast. And the first time I looked at it, it didn't seem real. I challenged it at first. I'm like, well, wait a minute. It can't be that bad. And I remember her saying, it is that bad. And I said, no, but look at how much profit we've made year to date. And her saying, yeah, you're making lots of profit, but the money's not coming in fast enough.
Right.
And so the gap is getting worse because you're not asking to get paid fast enough. And I remember that first conversation like it was yesterday because she immediately told me why the problem existed. And up until that point, I didn't have a lot of employees telling me why we had problems. And immediately I realized the difference. I needed an executive team. And so I started asking some customers and people with bigger businesses for advice on how did you find these people and how did you attract these people to come and work with you? And I remember a customer took me aside and he quickly sketched out the org chart. He said, here's what you need right now. You need somebody that looks after sales and marketing, and you need somebody that looks after your operations, and you need somebody that looks after your finance. That's all you need right now at your size. And I said, I look after all those things. And he said, I said that, and the project managers and the foremen are out doing the work. What am I going to do? And I remember him saying, I think you're actually in sales at this point. And I said, no, I'm not in sales. And he goes, well, you came and sold me my job. And the only reason why I decided to work with you is because you sold me the job. And he said, if I'm spending $1 million, I want to look the guy in the eyes that I'm going to give the $1 million to. And that made sense. I was a residential customer spending that much money.
Yeah.
And that advice really resonated with me. And that was, I think, when I started to realize that I really had to focus on relationships, and I would have to focus on strategy, and I would need an executive team if I was going to continue to scale the business. And I think that took me 4 or 5 more years to really learn and perfect. I think that was probably the hardest thing for me to really become good at in business. The trade part and the hands-on part was natural because I'd done that for 10 years. I hadn't run a company for an enterprise-sized company, and I certainly didn't have this mindset of hiring a finance leader and a revenue leader and an operations leader and a fleet manager. And these are different roles, but the business clearly had outgrown me. And that was a tough realization.
How did that transition look when all the things you've just talked about in the landscape industry and the beach gardener comes to an end on your side, and you're full-time with LMN and your focus is that? How relatable were the skills you learned?
Very relatable. Basically, when I was, I think, 3rd, 4th year in with LMN, like right around 13, 14, I could see the demand was really building. The app stores had come to market fully, and landscapers finally wrapped their head around giving smartphones to everybody. Like, this was only 10 years ago.
No, I
right?
know. I struggled with it.
People forget. And right around then, I could see the demand was really building for LMN, and I knew what I wanted to build in terms of product. But I was still pretty uncomfortable with the idea of giving up this big landscape company for this little tiny software business.
Totally.
And that was really difficult for me. But right around that time, I think, is when my mission started to shift again. I started to feel like this urge to solve my biggest problems for the whole industry. It was just, I had been 5 years or so of spending 6-7 months a year on the road, working with landscapers day in, day out, day in, day out. I would go city to city, 50 cities a year. And I started to really become more and more empathetic, I think, with the problems that most people were facing. And I would see those problems in my own company, because as I was scaling, you got to think it was like all kinds of mini companies within the company. And so the pain that a lot of these business owners were having, my field crew supervisors, my foremen, were essentially having the same pain. And so I started to really see the opportunity as being a lot bigger than what I had set out. So I started to seek mentors in tech, very similar to what I did in landscape. I just thought, I got to start asking better questions to people who have done what I'd like to do next.
And did you have a line in? Because I got the sense that you were a landscape guy who was building a software thing, but off of your landscape knowledge, did you have any tech?
No, that was hired. And so earlier when I said Mike came on board with me early on, Mike was a software engineer. And so Mike was very involved in running the landscape business for 3 years. because I had full intentions of systemizing the business. And I knew that we would do something with technology. I didn't think I would build a software platform for the industry. I was actually hiring him to come in and help me build systems and processes for my own company. The technology expertise came from Mike from day one right through to today. But yeah, what ended up happening is as I decided that I wanted to move more into the software direction, I just decided I needed mentors. So I joined a tech incubator down in Kitchener-Waterloo area because there's a really strong tech community there. And it was called Communitech. And almost immediately realized just how much I didn't know. I felt like an apprentice again, in the sense that I just had no idea what they were talking about. A lot of times they would be using terms that just meant nothing to me. So I felt like I was in another language sometimes. So I spent a year around there, and eventually I got the opportunity to do a Google internship program as well. That was sponsored by Google, and they basically put entrepreneurs with their employees, and their employees were like advisors. And so I learned a ton from Google as well. So that program was really valuable. And then what I ended up starting to do is I joined mastermind programs with tech people, with marketing people, with salespeople. And I started to just really focus a lot on just learning about tech businesses, sales, marketing, different topics that were very unusual for me in the past. But it was about a 5-year apprenticeship for me between 2014, I would say, and 2019. I just spent 5 years of just consuming everything possible. I only read books about software and about platforms, and I read a lot about sales and marketing, probably more about sales and marketing than anything, because I've always had an incredible technical partner in Mike. And I started to read a lot more about customer experience and how to create a customer experience. And I think those 5 years were really life-changing for me. Throughout those same 5 years, I really started to feel a different mission emerge. And by 2019, that mission was really clear to me. I was more interested in helping other people run great businesses than I was in having my own. Mine would become great as a result of being great at helping others become great. And so my mission just evolved. And I evolved over those 5 years. My feeling around business completely changed. I would say my strategy completely changed. It just really became all about creating incredible experiences for customers and employees, and business would just become better. And so this focus for me ended up really shifting into finding great people, being super selective about who I hire, and then really making sure that the mission was super clear to them, that it was our mission to build a thriving landscape industry. And along the way, I only hired people who were excited about doing big things. I didn't care if they were as passionate as I was about building a thriving landscape industry. I just wanted people who had a growth mindset, who wanted to be able to build really incredible things. And so at first it was attracting engineers and learning designers, and then it was getting great customer support people, and then it was customer success people, then it was salespeople, then it was building out an entire executive team. And so the problems always evolved as the business scaled, just the
Sounds
same
familiar.
as the landscape business.
Yeah.
Right.
And the more that I would seek out mentorship and peers to learn from, the faster I would get ahead of those problems. And so I think the more that I saw that, the more that I gravitated toward making that my life's work, because my life was getting better and better as a result of all of the advice that I was getting from other people.
Yeah.
And I could see that my advice was helping others as well. And really, that's how the mission ended up evolving to what it is now.
It's such an amazing story. And I think for the people that are listening to this, and that was what Jake and I had talked about when we knew we were going to be having this conversation, was just to have you tell that story. And I'm sure it's a story that a lot of people have heard, but I think it's the one that a lot of people haven't. And for the people that are out there struggling to get to $1 million or to get to 2 million, to be able to see what is possible and how much your career has evolved in a really not that long of a stretch. And from landscape to large commercial projects to unionized company to selling a company to building a software company. I think it's just insane. And would you have ever thought that when you started?
No, I just wanted to go skiing.
Right. That's still the goal. Eventually we'll be ski bum.
One day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my goal too.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark, thank you so much for everything. I think if I could, I've learned so much about your experience and how you look at business. It seems like what I'm getting is it's through this lens of never stop learning. It's just being open to the challenge and understanding that the challenge, there's always a solution. Mm-hmm. In many cases, you've said it's finding that next mentor, that coach that's going to take you to the next level. But I just see that when I talk to you, it's just, I see that thing. How are we going to step over it and continue walking in the direction that, and so what are some actionable tips that we can take away from this other than lay pavers in one day instead of 5? Because I like that one. I do like that one. But I was just wondering, do you have anything, could you give me three simple tips about if you could break down the best lessons that you've learned as an entrepreneur?
What I really try to teach people is to start with the end in mind. And that may change. Every year that may change. But I didn't start that way. And I think had I started that way, I could have saved a lot of pain along the way. And so just simply knowing where I want to be 5 years from now is probably enough as a startup. So where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? Where do you want to be in 25? Those are big questions to ask yourself. And if you can answer those questions and then create a plan for the coming year that gets you closer, if it's a 5-year plan, then I want to be 1 year closer to the 5 years. And at the end of the year, I can reassess. But I think a lot of small business owners don't begin with the end in mind. And so the days start to run into each other.
Totally.
They don't really understand how they're seeing incremental improvement. And I believe that happiness and fulfillment comes from seeing incremental improvement in your life. And when you can see where you want to go, and when you can see yourself getting there one step each day, then you're more motivated to continue on that pathway. And if you can measure it, then you've got a recipe that will succeed no matter what, because good results tell you what to do more of. The bad results are the best ones because they tell you what to stop doing or what needs changing. And so when you learn to embrace bad results, when you realize that bad results are your biggest gift because you're going to learn more from a bad result, then you can truly continue to grow and outpace everybody else, because while everybody else is afraid of bad results, you're looking for them. And when you look for them and you do something about it, that's uncommon. And you'll be the best if you do that day after day.
Great words.
Wow.
Great words.
I feel like you're talking right to me. Holy. Well, you are. But yeah, that was amazing. Thank you.
That was only one.
Yeah, that was only one. Yeah.
I can't even go. Do you have 2 more like that?
Yeah.
Holy, yeah, give it to me.
Number 2 is be careful of the stories you tell yourself, because they're usually not true. They're just limiting beliefs. We all have limiting beliefs. We got them somewhere. Sometimes we get them at school. Sometimes we get them from our parents, our friends, our coworkers. But usually they're not true. And so when somebody tells you you can't do something, I think you have to ask, whether or not that actually is true. And I think we can accomplish anything that we put our minds to, and we can change whenever we want. We're always just one decision away from changing. But I think most people let their limiting beliefs create a glass ceiling for them. I can't do this. But when you ask why, there's no meaning. There's no meaningful answer as to why not. Somehow they've told themselves that story that they can't get past that. But that is why I think it's so important to seek out mentorship, because your circle of influence dictates what your beliefs will be or not be. And if you're surrounded by the wrong people and you've got your own limiting beliefs, you have no way out of that. And so again, when you seek mentorship, you change your circle of influence. And when people are surrounding you who believe that you can do more and who believe that other people can do more, then you change your own beliefs. And that, I think, is something that many of us learn too late in life. So really being able to step outside of your limiting beliefs by changing your circle of influence. That's definitely a piece of advice that I wish I learned a little bit earlier in life. I think I stumbled on it. I think I got really lucky. But all too often, I think people live their whole lives believing that there's some sort of a ceiling when it's not really there, because of the people that they surround themselves with.
Yeah.
That would be number 2.
Okay. I'm ready.
Yeah.
Give me the last one because I'm ready.
Gold.
This is great. So far, we've got start with the end in mind, and to also just consider that there's no ceiling, that you can reshape what you believe about yourself.
Absolutely. Last one is purpose. I think we've talked about this and we've joked around about it quite a bit, but I didn't start out in business with a lot of clarity on my purpose, but I did have one. I wanted to create freedom, and I wanted to make more money. And that's okay if that's your purpose off the start. But I knew what it was, and I got out of bed every day, and I did the hard shit day after day because I knew what I was working for. And I think that's something that isn't that common in the world. We have to be clear on our purpose. If we want to be intrinsically motivated, we have to be laser clear on our purpose. Now, here is the lesson, because I think most entrepreneurs have a purpose that comes to mind. You have to make sure that everybody that comes to work with you also understands their purpose. Because if they're coming to work every day feeling as though they're trading their time for money and they don't see how they actually help people, then they're going to get tired of that job. And if they're tired of the job, then they're probably tired of the customers. And if they're tired of the customers, aren't going to have a good experience. And if they're tired of the customers and they're tired of their job, they're probably tired of their coworkers. And now everybody's tired of each other. Whereas if the company's purpose or mission is clear to everybody in it, in my case, I want to create a thriving landscape industry. I don't expect their personal mission to be that. But I do want people working with me who have a very clear mission and vision for their lives. But not everybody understands how to create a vision for their lives. So as business owners, I think it's our job to help people see a vision for their lives that's better than it is right now, and then create a company that makes it happen. And so when their vision's clear to them and the company vision's clear, then everybody can actually come to work with intention each day, and there's purpose to the work. And if everybody is serving that purpose and they measure it and they can see that incremental improvement that I talked about earlier, then the work becomes meaningful. And then greatness can be had. But if people don't see the purpose to their work, if they think they're trading their time for money instead of trading their time for growth and skills and trading their time for resources that get them to their mission or their vision for their life, then it'll never work. And so I think over my whole career, every setback, every failure, when I look back, was because I was surrounded by people who I didn't put enough time into. I didn't help them see the mission of the company clear enough. And I don't think they could see their life's vision and mission clear enough. And so things flame out because there's nothing being measured. What I ultimately am getting at here is mission and vision for a business is not mission and vision for everyone in it. Everybody in it has to have their own. And when the two come together, great things can happen. But we should know the vision that our employees have for their lives, and then we should help them create that. And that's what building people is all about.
Right. It's powerful stuff.
That's so insightful. I've taken a lot away from this call, just for myself, for my business, thinking about my team. I love talking with Kevin because he cares so much about his team.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising to me to hear someone else talking with so much passion about their business and their team. And I just really appreciate your insights and your thoughts on all of it. And it's been really fun chatting.
I just want to say too, Mark, like, one, thanks so much for being the first interview we've done.
One.
It was a blast. But more importantly, I just want to say to you that even without you knowing it for 17 years or however long it's been, I have gotten so much motivation out of watching you lead meetings and conferences and ski trips and all the cool stuff you've done. And I know I'm one of thousands that you have helped not only be successful, but change their vision about how their business operates and what the potential is for them to help other people and create value for their teams and themselves. And I think work is work, but there can be much more purpose in it. Not only have you helped me realize that, I think you've helped thousands of people realize it. And I thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's
I appreciate
incredible.
that. Thank you.
Wow. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You guys are awesome.
It's late.
Yes.
Wow.
It's late.
Yeah.
Thank
it was
you.
Amazing.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot for the chat.
Yes.
Really appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.